Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang anuttarang pajayang namasami. When I began my practice here at Abhayagiri, I became a resident. It was after just a couple of years of learning about meditation practice. I'd been interested in Buddhism since I was about 15, after reading the book Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Took a few Buddhist courses in college and didn't really practice, didn't have a sense of formal meditation until much later on. And so when I started to get into meditation, it was after having lived in China and Tibet and not found exactly what I was looking for in terms of searching for Buddhism there. I was there for about 2 years. And so I came back to California and on the recommendation from a friend to start sitting retreats. And I did what many typical people do, is started with a Goenka course for 10 days and then shortly after did a 1-month retreat. And I think that was when there was just a real sense of the practice having a meaning, because before that I didn't really have a sense that there was a difference between what I was experiencing and that there was a sense of space around that I could just be aware of what I was experiencing at the same time. Sort of like life often felt, overwhelming, as many people can talk about, sort of the experiences, and there wasn't much of a real way to relate to them, other than just trying to develop an understanding. But it was an understanding that didn't come from the Dhamma. It was a sort of a worldly understanding, and probably some of it generated from growing up with the Jewish religion. So when I arrived at Abhayagiri, there was a lot of inspiration, a tremendous amount of inspiration for training, becoming a monk, understanding the Buddha's teachings, and learning about the mind. and I understood that that required a sense of developing a moral integrity and a sense of patience. But being an Anagarika wasn't easy. It was a pretty busy time of year, building, I think there were 5 kutis, building a path outside. And it seemed like a lot of major projects. For a time I was the only Anagarika, driving every other afternoon and kitchen managing. So it was a bit of a full-on time, and I'd say there was a fair amount of confusion, delusion, and greed and aversion. But I've been reflecting on how I started and what my intentions were at the time, and that interest, and how that generated a sense of a real wish to go forth into the holy life. And it was so difficult at times that I did at one point wonder whether I would stay. It was quite a challenging time. I think there would be weeks, even months, I wouldn't end up seeing my kuti, at least during the day, just be in the nighttime hours. But I think after almost 15 years now, it's interesting how I can relate to that experience now and just think, wow, it didn't seem to be that tough. It didn't seem to be that difficult. It's just at the time it seemed to be. And so I've recently reflected as well, just kind of thought about these intentions, thought about why I wanted to be a monk, what my sense was around the practice, training, and essentially what is it I would go back and tell myself as an Anagarika, Anagarika Li. What would I say to him? I'm not sure if he would actually listen, but I try to persuade him as best I could. So I think one of the things that I would try to encourage him in is to rely on what the Buddha calls hiriyottapa. Which is sometimes translated as shame of wrongdoing, feeling shame around that, and fear of consequences. Fear of consequences in the way that come from unwholesome acts, intentions. But it's also translated as conscientiousness and carefulness. And why I think that's important is that it has probably been overlooked at times, and I think it would be an excellent emphasis to go back and bring forward, to put on the front burner. Because there's a sense of really kind of thinking about what it is that we're doing here, and how it is that's affecting not only ourselves but the rest of the people we live with. And so can we develop, I would encourage Lee to develop a sense of kind of pulling back from any sense of, I really wouldn't want to do that thing because that would have unwholesome consequences. And to also develop a sense of, why would I want to do that? That sense of conscientiousness, or also translated as shame, is sort of like how a feather pulls back. The Buddha describes it when it gets near a fire. That's the feeling you have when you want to, maybe something occurs to your mind to do that it just doesn't feel right. And so that brings up a sense for me of protection for the mind, protection for myself and others. And I think it requires a sense of authenticity, a sense that we're willing to be honest with ourselves. My father had a quote at on his desk that he worked at, and it said, "To thine own self be true." And so I think, what I'd recommend to Lee is just to really kind of examine your motives, why you're doing things, what you're doing. Is it in your best interest? Is it going to harm others? And to really, really bring that to the fore. Because the consequences aren't worth it when you decide to do something that is risky or going to cause risk in terms of causing trouble. And at the same time, I think it's very important. It'd be important for me to explain to him that you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and there's no avoiding that. But rather than focusing on not wanting to make mistakes, you can focus on, what's it like to experience that, when you feel like a failure, and to remind yourself that, well, everyone feels that way. Everyone makes mistakes. There's not really a problem with it. The problem is thinking that perfection is some sort of ideal that we want to reach. And really it's about a sense of our own self-worth, or the fact that we think others will judge us. Bizarre sense that people don't make mistakes like we make mistakes, and so therefore there's something inherently bad, something negative about who and what we are. And so I'd tell him, don't worry about defending yourself. Don't worry about kind of making yourself look good or speak wisely, because it's just, none of those things are important. The important thing is that you're learning from this. Because all of it is creating a sense of self. It's solidifying who and what you think you are. And so when you do make mistakes, it's important that you have a sense more of forgiveness, forgiving yourself, because there's really nothing else that is important around that. It's just completely normal. And so when you find that you can do that, then it's very important to examine how you do that with other people. Because if you're not willing to allow yourself to make mistakes, if you have some sort of perfectionist attitude about how and what you're supposed to be, then you're not going to allow others to have problems, difficulties. So it's really an all-encompassing sense of allowing oneself and others to be how they are. And in that vein, I would tell him to be very careful of the critical mind. That mind that wishes to look at others' behaviors and think that they should be better. That I have a sense of what is right and wrong for them. And in the Buddhist teachings, there's so much about what's called translated as admonishment. I like to say feedback. But in order to do that in a way that's actually helpful for somebody else, then one needs to establish goodwill. Really a sense that this is a thing that would be helpful for another person. And we have to figure out the right time and the place, how they'll receive it, whether it's welcome. There's a lot of thought that the Buddha put in to how we talk to others about something that we think might help them. And so I would probably tell just don't do it. Don't try to be very careful about that unless there is really this goodwill that's established. Because mostly what people need is space. They need a sense to grow and not be afraid of the place that we live in. I mean, so many people are judging themselves already. You need to add a layer on top of that. I'd also tell him to look out for his patterns, for what we call karma. What are the patterns that he has that he can think of for himself that tend to get him in trouble? What are the patterns that are helpful? What are the things that have been successful so far? What are the ruts in the mind? And to say that they're not a personal thing. We all have these tendencies, especially we call them underlying tendencies, and they're just part of who we are. But the more that we can try to understand them, to learn from them, then we have the potential to not be under the power of them. And they might have come from many lifetimes. These patterns, this karma, paka karma that we have. I'd probably tell him about one of the patterns that I thought he could improve on, and that's his sense of needing to make other people understand him. And so one of the things that I think is so important, but is as a difficulty, is that sense of being willing to be misunderstood. Master Hua used to sometimes say to some of his students that they did something that was not the right thing to have done. Something that was, had happened or whatever it was. But he'd actually not say this to the person who did it. He'd say it to another monk or another nun. And he was just testing his students. He was saying, well, how are they going to respond to actually being accused of something that they didn't do? And the tendency is, oh, that wasn't me. That was so-and-so, or that was somebody else. I didn't do that. And so that sense of being willing to be misunderstood is not, that need to kind of go and tell somebody, like, whoa, that's not what I meant, or that wasn't me who did that, or when I made this mistake, it was because yada, yada, yada. And I tell him to just try to be willing to sit with that. Sit with misunderstanding. It goes with the sense of like, what do you do when somebody's upset with you or angry, and actually that you're not responsible for that. And that Dhammapada phrase, it says they remain happy even amongst those who hate them. It's a very valuable reflection. Luckily, that doesn't seem to happen too much in a monastery. One of the things I would also point out is to just remember that meditation is the backbone. It is not just the backbone, it is the bones of your entire practice. We can say that, I'm just trying to generate mindfulness all day and all the postures, and I don't have time sometimes to go back to my kuti or just find something else to do for a particular hour. But I would try to encourage Lee to try to see his kuti during the day, even though those times seem impossible. And if he can't, then just find time to really delve into as much formal practice as he can. And it's not, it's not about the hours or necessarily seeing like the mind as having a great meditation or not. It's just continuing, just kind of working with that sense of that formal practice, sitting and walking meditation. You do lying and standing. It doesn't matter, but it's a time to just be quiet, to be alone, to generate that sense of intention towards examining the mind. This seems obvious, but meditation can take sort of it can go to the back burner. It can be something that becomes less important, and the life in the monastery can be the schedule, the tasks, what it is that we kind of do, our responsibilities, checking off our list of to-dos. Or the meditation itself, just maybe there's a lot of boredom in the mind just starts to wander. There's not that intention to really focus on learning, to focus on understanding. And so it's not just doing the practice, it's actually like what our intention is around that. And unfortunately, so often I think for myself, like the microscope is kind of put on there, and there can be a sort of, this just kind of constant like looking, and then there can be sometimes a rebellion against that. I don't want to look. I want to look today. And so the mind can lose that intention. It can lose that focus on learning and understanding. And the meditation practice is essentially, it's like a supercharger for a car, like an electric car. It gives us enormous results, and then it helps us throughout the day maintain our mindfulness. So if we can really generate that calm and clear state of examination, of watching our minds, then throughout the day, maintaining mindfulness is just so much easier. And many of us know that. But I would tell Lee to really try to focus on that. Really try to bring that in as one of the most important things. Just drop tasks sometimes. Just don't get so involved. Let go of conversations. Go back to your kuti. Spend time alone. Remember why you came here. And to find the uplifting qualities in meditation. The sense of buoyancy, joy that comes from clarity and calm. Because it's that joy that will give that sense of ongoing intention towards the practice. So try not to see this as drudgery, but rather as something that brings the mind to a buoyancy, a sense of uplifting. The difficulty, I think, sometimes is that most of our lives as Buddhist practitioners is really, it comes down to how we relate to our own experience. How it is that we are looking at our minds, looking at our behaviors. What it is that we're doing. And that relating to experience has to come from kindness. The taskmaster is just going to reduce our intentions towards learning. That kind of voice that can be heard that's, stay on task, do your job. This is a terrible meditation. Can't you just get a little bit of mindfulness? So I think we have to really look at the voice that's coming through as Ajahn Jeff calls them, the committee members. What are our committee members? This goes back to that sense of patterning. What are the different voices that we hear? Because the idea of a self is, as we know, it's just a fallacy. There's so many actual selves that bounce around in the mind. It can be the judgmental one, the one who's kind of confused, not sure what to do. Greedy monster. If you listen, sometimes there's a quiet one in the back sometimes, or several of them. They don't get to speak too often. But when there's positive qualities in the mind, those voices can be heard. Kindness, friendliness, a sense of clarity about what is the right thing to do. But they only come about if I think the intention is in the right place. One of the things that I see is this relation to unpleasant experiences, unpleasant emotional states, and the fact that when something like anger comes in, or greed, or fear, shame, whatever it is, there's a sense of, for me at least, I see a judgment that comes in. For the actual emotion arising that's difficult or painful, as if it shouldn't be here. There's something wrong with it being here, and there's something wrong with me for having some difficulty. And B, that sense that I have to run away from it. I just have to get it away, get it out. Sort of like these double judgments. And then we just compound things. At least that's my own experience, is it's a compounding of dukkha. It's a compounding of sort of being crowded in, tied in to the dukkha. And so the more that we actually can open up to these experiences and actually see them as learning potentials, then they have that possibility of really informing our practice to show us, can I really allow this? Can I open to it? And so I think that's a very important lesson that can sometimes, in my own practice, not be seen very clearly. Because the opposite can actually be true. It doesn't have to be a judgment. It can actually be a joy. When we see something that's difficult, or we see a mistake, or we're about to go do something that is not helpful for us, then there can be this joy arising, and that's simply based on the fact that we see it. So it's not a problem anymore that it's there. We get to actually see it as something that's quite helpful to us. The problem is when we don't see it, then we act on it and regret later. So again, it's coming back to encouraging that joy in practice, that sweetness. And to know that, difficult emotions, difficulties come up, they arise, but they also cease. They just come and go. And so it's we hear that all the time, but how often is it that, at least I can see in my own experience, that it just becomes this, oh no, it's permanent. I'm going to have to deal with this difficulty in a permanent way. Or if it's a positive experience, something positive in the meditation, I have to keep this, I have to hold on to it. I can't let it go. Or when it ends, then I compare another meditation to that, I compare another experience to that. I think in the monastic life, I would probably tell Anagarika, I'd say, really pay attention to, what a monastery is. It's a group of people. If nobody was here, it ceases to really be a monastery. And so first and foremost, try to really pay attention to your teachers. And if you can find a teacher who you trust, then that is gold. That is gold. That is something that can aid you all the time in your practice, someone you feel like you can go to, get understanding, clarity around. Who you can trust to look after you. But I would also tell Lee to be very careful around his teacher or his teachers, because it's easy to judge them, to expect them to be perfect. And it goes back to that perfectionism idea that we hold with ourselves. And so when a teacher has to reach this ideal where they have to be perfect for us. And that's just a very unfortunate way of thinking. Because if we don't allow our teachers to make mistakes, to not understand things clearly, then we're going to miss out on the potential for them to provide us with an enormous amount of wisdom. Because we'll always be kind of holding back and not wanting to open ourselves because of our own doubts and criticisms. And that's a very sad thing, so I think it's important to be very, very circumspect with how we hold our teachers in our minds. And the opposite can be true, that sort of sense of they are perfect. And we keep that perception in mind, and then when they make a mistake, it can be disappointing. So I would tell Anagarika Lee to really try to trust in a teacher or several teachers that he has, and utilize them. Follow what they say. Try not to say yes, but, or I'd rather do it my way. Because it's even that effect of just following a teacher's advice, that even when we don't think it's right, it's not right for me. But if we follow it, then we'll see whether that's true or not. And if we don't, if we're not willing to allow them to guide us, then we just won't see for ourselves. We'll be stuck in our own views and opinions. And so we are trusting their years of practice, their wisdom, and seeing them as a refuge. And I would also tell Lee to really try to pay attention to those who he lives with. And I'd say, even the people who you're frustrated with now, they eventually become your best friends. They become people who guard you and protect you and look after you. And I'd say, yeah, sure, they have quirks. Everybody has quirks. You might get annoyed with this one or that one, and that's very normal. But do you think they're not getting annoyed with you? Do you think you don't have these quirks and these problems? And these things that can drive people up the wall? Of course you do. So just remember, any time that you're frustrated with somebody, they're probably also frustrated with you. It's not a real personal thing. And you can rely on those you live with. You can rely on them to help clarify for you the Dhamma. You can lean into those friendships. You can try to build a house of Dhamma, so that it's not a discussion of views and who's right, but a sense of how do we really understand things with each other? How can we clarify the Dhamma with each other? So, oh yeah, that's right, that's how I see it, okay. That's how you see it. Oh yeah, that makes sense. And so often it can, can move into talking about buildings or worldly things. But there's just not that much time. And we want to remember to feel that the time that we have with others is actually quite sacred. And to see that when we're with others, we have to be very careful about what we say, because that can move ourselves or each other into unwholesome directions. And knowing Lee's propensities, I'd probably tell him to put a cork in his mouth sometimes. And not to drink coffee around others. That might drive him nuts too. Other practical advice. And just to get to know those patterns and not take them so seriously. I tell him not to abuse his body, be careful with his body, to not go to extremes. And especially just to be careful of the middle way. How the Buddha really encouraged us to not move towards sensuality, and how easy that is even as a monk. There might be a sense of coming to the monastery and just drop all your baggage and it's all sort of let go of, but it just doesn't work that way. You bring everything with you. And so just to be careful around those extremes that the Buddha talks about, that sense of sensual indulgence or torturing ourselves essentially. Just to avoid those extremes, to come back to the center. Because it's just, the monastic life is not about excitement, it's not about extreme. And to make it that way is a great error. It's about peace. And peace isn't exciting. But it's clarifying, and it brings wisdom, understanding. So I think I would just try to let him know it doesn't turn out that bad, and he's going to be all right. But there are some pitfalls to avoid, and to really be careful. Take this opportunity in a very careful way, and really see it as that. See it as a great, incredible opportunity. And it's okay to get lost sometimes. It's okay to fall off of that, to lose the intention sometimes towards the practice, but just to keep coming back through boredom, through pain, mistakes, loss, through happiness, or dreaming about somewhere happy that he might be. It's just okay. But it's important to kind of continually review those intentions, to come back to the original intentions of why we're practicing. Because the mind can falter so quickly. But if we put those intentions in place and we remind ourselves daily, we commit daily to what it is that we're doing, hourly. We keep making commitments moment by moment. Then we have the potential to use the Buddha's teachings, to use the Buddha's path, to have an incredible understanding. But every now and again, we do need that sense of pulling ourselves back on the path. Reminding ourselves of what's important, why we're here. And the goodness that it brings, not just to ourselves, but to the whole world. You want